What's going on, guys? Welcome back into another episode of the Fantasy Slant, brought to you by Pro Football Focus and powered by Pro Football Focus. We are here, as usual. I have my three co-hosts with me. We have Brandon, Marianne Lee. You want to say hi, Brandon?
Hi. Wearing jerseys on a Tuesday. It got weird, people. It got weird fast.
Did it really? Like, sitting in Arizona, it's a little bit different. I hear about cold weather, and I have no idea what it's like anymore in Arizona. So we have Nathan Jahnke with us. Nate, you want to say hello?
Hello. How's it going, everyone?
And then we got Daniel Kelley. Daniel, what's going on?
What's going on, guys? How we doing?
All right, so we're doing good, guys. It's a big waiver wire week. It's funny because it's like, there's not any like huge names that jump out like the Jordan Howard last week, but there are a few names that are definitely on the radars. And like the more I started to go through the waiver wire this week, the more I was just like excited like to get into some of these names because it's a really, really deep week. Maybe just not so top heavy as last week. But before we get into it, guys, make sure you're following all of us on Twitter. You can follow Brandon at BrandonHerFFB, Nathan it's at PFF_Nate Jahnke. That is JAHNKE. And then we have Daniel Kelley at Daniel T. Kelley. Guys, any big takeaways from week 4 before we start talking about the waiver wires? I know me personally, I'm wearing my Matt Ryan jersey today. I'm a happy man today. If I had a second team outside of the Bears, it would be the Falcons. So I'm happy to see them playing well. I actually went back and rewatched the Falcons game against the Panthers, and it was nonstop Julio Jones highlights. So that was the highlight of my week, to see him back, making his way through the football field like he does, and just being Julio Jones. But is there anything like big to happen for you guys? Anything that you're particularly excited about?
I guess I'll go. I was, after 3 weeks watching the Patriots, I thought they were unstoppable, and then seeing them this past week, seeing that they can be stopped, I was going into it thinking, okay, the Patriots, once they have Brady back, this will be the clear Super Bowl favorite going forward, and then the rest of the team just kind of fell apart, so now it's a competitive season for everyone again.
Yeah, Daniel, anything with you?
I just think it's amazing how few good teams we have right now.
Yeah.
The only undefeated teams we have left, 2 of them have, there's a Northwestern quarterback who flamed out, a rookie, and Sam Bradford as their quarterbacks in the undefeated teams. It's amazing what we have going on in the NFL right now.
Isn't it though? It's crazy. Like, you look at the Cardinals 1-3. Yeah, the only undefeated teams are Sam Bradford and the Vikings, and then you have Carson Wentz. So who would have thought? Both of the quarterbacks that were in Philadelphia are sitting there as undefeated options. Brandon, what are your big takeaways?
And the Broncos. The Broncos are undefeated. I would like to point that out. Oh, yes. Yeah. They're very good. They're very good at football. I just want to...
They're amazingly good. It's just...
People underestimate them, and Kubiak pulled up straight-up Bill Belichick by just saying, hey, Paxton, you go in there, you do your thing. Whatever. It's fine. No one cares. I think Von Miller is just out of control. Yeah. He's like the Julio Jones of defense. I don't understand what's happening with him. The whole defense, actually, they just work together well as a unit. I will say, though, that I think that we're starting to finally see the Devontae Freeman, the real one, who is standing up, again, outperforming Tevin Coleman, even in a Julio Jones clinic. So I think that, perhaps – I won't get. I will say I have received a lot less tweets about that Devontae Freeman call lately. So yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, no, I actually tweeted out yesterday that that Tevin Coleman still is yet to have a game this year with more than 3.8 yards per carry. So I don't think that he's a better running back. I think that he's been doing fine in goal line situations, and that's fine. Devonta Freeman's going to have a little vulture, but Devonta Freeman's the better running back, and I stand by that. But no, I mean, like, before we get in, I want to make sure we touch on last night's game. Are you guys, Brandon, are you concerned about Odell Beckham?
Yeah. I mean, I am.
What do you think the problem is?
I think that there's a personality issue there, and I know we're not supposed to be Narrative Nation. This is supposed to be stats, and obviously his stats are reflecting that. The guy, he's getting the targets. Let's just stop ourselves here. I actually just wrote an article about this today, about who were the top ADP guys and who's actually the top today, a quarter of the way in. And, certainly, when you look at what's going on with him, it's a play calling issue. And again, we have Sterling Shepard in the slot, but I think they're leaning on him in a way that I didn't predict, at least, because I think they don't trust Odell Beckham Jr. And I think that these antics are affecting him. I don't like that Ben McAdoo came out and talked about it. I think that's a horrible sign for him. And again, we're going to get into the more like statistical based, evidence there. But as far as I'm concerned, that was the big one. He just loses control and then his stats decline because he's just out of sorts. And you can see that on the field with the way that he's running his routes, the way that he's not completing, at the end of the catch. It's very erratic. That would be the word that I would use right now for Odell Beckham Jr. I think he's fine. His skill set is still there. I think he can get it together. But certainly if I'm an owner, I'm disappointed, and you should be.
Yeah, no, I don't like the way that they're using him. I don't like the way that they are leaning on Sterling Shepard. I think they need to make some changes to the offense. And this week, it could be the cure to everything. If Sam Shields is out for Green Bay again, that could be like the game that gets him back on track. But
and I want to say too, Minnesota defense, I said this the last 2 weeks, again, legit. They're like the Broncos. You have to temper your expectations when your studs are going up against them. So I will give him that credit. Xavier Rhodes is legit.
Yeah, he's been playing just as good as Josh Gordon has, or as Josh Gordon. Don't even talk about Josh Gordon. Josh Norman. All right, guys. But this is the Waiver Wire show. We need to talk about some waiver wire additions, and we have a lot to get through. So instead of going through each option and going through every person, I might just start with one and then move our way through it. But let's start with the quarterback position. Nathan, I want to start with you. Let's talk about one. There's only really one quarterback that you could talk about potentially picking up and starting this week in fantasy leagues. Although the Broncos aren't saying that Trevor Siemian's going to be out this week, I would assume that he wouldn't play. Let's pretend that he's going to be ruled out. How would you feel about Paxton Lynch as a starter? He looked very competent when he took over this week.
Yeah, I think I'd be okay with Lynch just for this upcoming week, just because he's going up against the Falcons. But I do think he looked like a rookie. He was someone where when there was no pressure on him, he looked great. But when he did have pressure on him, he had, I think, 1 sack. And all 5 of his throws were incomplete when he was under pressure. 0 for 5 on deep passes as well. So he was good at some things, not so good at others. But for just this week going up against the Falcons defense that doesn't have as much of a pass rush as other teams do. So that should definitely help Lynch. And the Falcons secondary hasn't been great so far this season. So I think this week Lynch could have a good week. But if he's asked to start for more than this week, I wouldn't trust him beyond this one.
No, I like that call, and that's the thing is Tampa Bay has been like a funnel defense. You could throw all day on them, so you can't take too much away from the one performance. But as Nathan said, Atlanta's been lacking a pass rush, so that could be a game where he kind of picks them apart too. It's good to see that Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders don't go to fantasy, irrelevance with Paxton Lynch at the quarterback regardless. So feel good about those two. The next quarterback is one I do believe he's going to start this week, although I think that, Daniel, I'm going to ask you about this. It's more of like a super flex option because I don't think that in 1 or 2 – I don't know if in 2 quarterback leagues you'd want to start him. But if let's say it's a super flex, you got somebody on bye, and you're deciding between a wide receiver and Drew Stanton for the Cardinals because Carson Palmer did suffer a concussion. He's going to, I don't think he's going to play. Bruce Arians doesn't like playing players that miss practice time. I don't see Carson Palmer playing. Would you feel comfortable putting Drew Stanton in your super flex spot?
Well, the Cardinals activated Zach Dysert today, or maybe yesterday. So either way, I think that's pretty clear Palmer's not going to play. If it's coming down to it, if I'm in a super flex, we have 4 teams on a bye this week. So if it's Drew Stanton or my 4th or 5th receiver, I mean, sure, a quarterback always has that chance, but that's about it on Drew Stanton. I can't imagine using him when I have any other real option. We've seen what he does. We saw him throw, 2 interceptions on 11 attempts on the weekend?
Yep.
That's pretty much what he is. So yeah, if it's Drew Stanton or just to pick a name at random, Mohamed Sanu
and
Bolden, sure. I'll probably go Drew Stanton at that point. But if it's Drew Stanton or anybody that I'm normally starting on a week-to-week basis, I'll probably just go with the normal starter.
Yeah, and the reason I'd probably lean towards Stanton as well is in a super flex like that is because you're talking about they're playing the 49ers. Navarro Bowman is going to miss this game. He's out for the year. He got a torn Achilles. We don't know if they're going to still be missing their slot corner, Eric Rodgers. I don't know what's going on with San Francisco. They're not great, but they're not as bad as I guess we thought they'd be on defense. But I'll be interested to see what happens with Bowman gone. But, we don't need to talk too much about that. Let's talk a couple streaming options because this is the Waiver Wire show, and a lot of people have started to play the Waiver Wire with quarterbacks. Brandon, Okay, so this is going to be one of my craziest calls of the week. I'm going to talk it on my DFS shows later in the week, but I'm really going to consider playing Ryan Fitzpatrick in cash this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is that crazy?
No, I don't think it's like insane on a DFS level. I don't know if I would do it in my season-long league. I don't know if he's worth a roster spot. I would rather do Brian Hoyer at Indianapolis. Indianapolis' defense. Woof.
They are bad. Indianapolis' defense is terrible. But even if you look at Pittsburgh, I mean, you saw this game will take place in Pittsburgh, which is where Ben Roethlisberger puts up points. You know, Darrelle Revis, they can't trust him on Antonio Brown. I don't see any way that they do that. So you got to think that it's going to be a similar situation to last week where we saw the Chiefs, you know, garbage time. And it's going to be the same thing with the Jets. That's why I feel comfortable at least 17 points allowed to quarterbacks in each of their last 3 games with the Steelers. They don't get a pass rush. You know, if Ryan Shazier is out again, that hurts their run defense. So I don't know. I just don't know if Matt Forte is right. I heard that he had to go for an X-ray after the game. Has anybody heard anything about that with Matt Forte?
I have not heard the update, no.
I heard that he had to go for an X-ray after the game, but nobody knew what it was about. So I'm curious to see what happens in that game. But I do like Ryan Fitzpatrick. You know, Brandon mentioned Brian Hoyer. Nathan, what do you think about Brian Hoyer? I know John Fox has said that he might steal the starting job if he keeps playing well. I'm not going to sit here and say that Brian Hoyer played well. He put up 17 points on a Lions defense that was missing arguably 2 of their top 3 players. Like, what do you think about Brian Hoyer this week at Indy?
Yeah, I think since it's the Indianapolis defense, I think Hoyer could have another good game. I think Hoyer did have a good game last week. I don't think it's something that'll consistently happen week in and week out if he continues to be the starter, but just looking at the defenses he's facing, he's someone that can do well against a bad defense, and that's what he's doing this week. So if you need someone this week that has higher upside, I think Hoyer is probably the guy. I think Fitzpatrick, going back to him a little bit, I'd almost be worried of him getting benched this week in the middle of the game if he continues to do poorly. So I might not want to start a quarterback who's in danger of missing part of the game because of that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that they're going to kind of use the excuse of Cutler's thumb to kind of keep him out one more game to see how Hoyer does. I'm interested to see what happens with Kevin White because he left and he needed x-rays on his ankle. So I don't know what's going on there. But you know what, Brandon, I'm jumping right back to you because the last streaming option is one that I want to make sure I get your take on because we all know that you love Ryan Tannehill. Tell me if you think he's startable against the Tennessee Titans and Parrish Cox.
I mean, no. Guys, just don't do it to yourself. It's so frustrating. Again, he's in a great matchup, so he'll be mediocre. I mean, that's, maybe. Sure. The problem with him is he's just so unpredictable. His coach is just on the verge of losing it. His offensive line is tragic. He's continually under pressure. They don't have a run game. They don't really have a game in the air either. They just have one pass that goes for a touchdown at the beginning of the game, and I was like, oh no, am I going to have to apologize for Tannehill again? Thank God. No, he just Tannehilled out last week. I just think... Yeah, it's just so frustrating with him. And it's not just him. I'm just being entirely fair here. That offensive line is really tragic. And when your rookie is the only guy who's stopping anyone from tackling you, that's really depressing. I think Adam Gase, you actually saw his face go, wow, we have a lot of work to do. This is a 2 to 3 year project. Yeah. We're not talking about 1 week. We're talking about years.
Well, my question here is that, the Tennessee Titans defense, the run defense is a lot better than people give them credit for. They have still yet to allow a running back to score 11 fantasy. Lamar Miller, they kind of held him in check last week. And they've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown on the year. So when you look at this, it's like, okay, well, if Miami's not going to score a rushing touchdown, which, I don't even know if they have the player to do so right now, they have to generate points from somewhere. So, I mean, I think you might be able to expect 250 and 2 out of Tannehill. I mean, there might be a fumble and an interception in there, but
they're good against quarterbacks too. The highest scorer for them has been Matthew Stafford, and he only scored 15.5 points in week 2. Yeah. Even Derek Carr scored 12 points against them. So, I think that we think they're easy, and when it comes to fantasy points, they're not.
Yeah, no, it's more of like usually I tend to aim for my wide receivers against that defense than my quarterbacks. But I think we're in agreement here though that Ryan Fitzpatrick and Brian Hoyer are better streaming options than Ryan Tannehill. But if for some reason those two are taken before you, I think Tannehill is a decent fallback option with a high floor against Tennessee is all. But let's move on. There's not many quarterbacks to talk about this week, but the running back position's a little bit more interesting, especially in Baltimore. We know that Harbaugh talked about, he's like, things are going to change. It's not been good. And, even though it was, Justin Forsett is the one who was inactive, Terrence West was part of the problem. Like, he was part of the problem. He got plenty of carries in the first 3 weeks. It's not like, he just was activated and he played and he did well. Our analysts, I know that they graded out Terrence West this week as below average, that he basically just got what was blocked for him, that it was nothing special. So, Daniel, let's go to you. Let's talk about Terrence West and Kenneth Dixon. If you had to pick one of these going forward, which one would you pick and why?
If I'm playing him right now or even close to it, it's got to be West. I think if we're talking any kind of dynasty or anything like that, it's Dixon, sure. But right now we're talking about a rookie who hasn't played yet, who's barely practiced, and who's been hurt first month of the season. Sure, Dixon might be great, but you're putting a whole lot of eggs in that basket if there's anyone you're even close to relying on. West isn't great, but at least he's played.
Well, let's pretend that you don't need him necessarily for this week. Let's say that, you might need a running back to cover buys in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like, what's a better rest of the season option?
If we're talking anything over the next month, I'm staying with West. If we're talking, I'm going to stash someone and hopefully something happens late, it's not a roster spot I really need at all, sure, I'll take Dixon, hope for the lottery pick. But if it's anybody I can see using at any point, it's going to be West right now.
Nathan, who you got in that?
I agree with Daniel there. I think West is probably the safer option if you need anyone over this next month. I think once Dixon comes in, he'll be eased into playing time. He won't just take over the starting role right away. So ideally, Dixon takes over by the end of the season, and then you have that lottery ticket that you've been holding on to. But West, I know he graded out slightly below average, but a big part of that was the fumble. He did look a little bit better outside of that one play than he had looked in previous weeks. So I think West, as long as it's in a game where Baltimore is expected to win and they're going to run a lot, then I think West is a fine enough option to have.
Yeah, ideally for me, I try and avoid the situation if possible. I think Dixon's the cheaper one. And I've stashed him in a few leagues. I'm not relying on him as a starter. I just think that eventually he'll take that job. And if I own Terrence West, I would probably try and see what I can get for him right now. He doesn't catch passes, and that's the part that worries me. In today's NFL, you want somebody that can catch passes out of the backfield and do it well. I don't believe that he's caught more than one pass in any week this year. So that's what Buck Allen was activated for. Brandon, let's talk about another committee that a lot of people are kind of overreacting on the Ryan Matthews news. Like, do you?
Yes, because they didn't read my article 2 weeks ago.
There you go. So are you buying, like, grabbing Wendell Smallwood, Darren Sproles off the waiver wire, or do you think it was just like they only played this much because Ryan Matthews was hurt?
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what happens to Philadelphia, because clearly they were not honest on their injury report. Having a guy go from 22 carries down to 9, and then having a huge taped up ankle injury, I don't know. I'm intrigued by what happened there. It's a new head coach. I don't know if there was some sort of confusion or what have you, but it definitely explained the drop in carries. I do think that it's a little bit of a committee situation, but again, I think it's Ryan Matthews scoring the touchdowns, and regardless of your format, you want the guy who's scoring touchdowns. I do think that the Darren Sproles portion of the committee is absolutely legit, but that is also basically a receiver option for Carson Wentz in general. He has the lowest average depth per aimed throw right now. Everything about what Darren Sproles does helps him as a rookie quarterback. So I'm fine with that. I think that this is a little bit of an overreaction. However, Ryan Matthews' injury history is not an overreaction. So I'm getting Wendell Smallwood as a handcuff at this point. But I think it's very clear that Doug Peterson wants to run the ball and he wants to use Darren Sproles in the passing game. You have to accept that. However, when we're talking about waiver wire, Darren Sproles is available in over 50% of leagues, at least on Yahoo. So again, I think that he's going to get a lot of targets moving forward. He and Jordan Matthews are perfect complements to what Carson Wentz is doing.
Yeah, I think that basically Darren Sproles' role, regardless, doesn't change, whether it's Ryan Matthews out there, whether it's Wendell Smallwood. He's going to continue with that same role. So what you've seen so far is kind of what you get with Darren Sproles, whereas Wendell Smallwood is the high upside option. So if you're just looking for a pure bench stash, Smallwood's probably the one, because as Brandon mentioned, yes, Ryan Matthews' injury history does not speak well of him. Another name that's popping up, Daniel, that a lot of people have dropped him, and that's James White. With Tom Brady coming back, does that change things for you with James White? Do you think that he's someone that you could literally plug into a flex until Dion Lewis comes back? We have a couple weeks to get some work out of James White. Is he somebody that you would look to pick up?
I put White into one of my lineups this week already. Now, part of that is that team has Sammy Watkins, Dante Moncrief, a whole bunch of hurt guys. But, yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you look at what White did down the stretch with Brady last year. He's a perfectly good sub in for Dion Lewis in that offense. And if you're hurting for a running back, especially if it's PPR, he's going to be productive this week.
Yeah, no, I like James White a lot. Nathan, do you think that James White is worth a pickup? Like, let's say over a guy like Bilal Powell or DeAndre Washington, would you take James White over those two guys?
I would probably take Powell over White. My concern with White is he just hasn't been seeing enough playing time. He's only been in 32.6% of snaps so far this season, and even with Brady back, I don't see his snaps increasing a ton. He'll see a little more targets, maybe, and more yards than he's been seeing. But at the Patriots, they're playing the Bill, or I don't recall who they're playing next. But with how good they've been playing the Browns, I could see them winning a lot and then just running the entire game. And if they're running, then White's the guy who's not going to be on the field.
Yeah, then they get the Bengals after that in week 6. So I think the Bengals would be a better matchup for James White. Brandon, if it came down to you and you're looking at the waiver wire and the top options are gone, but you're looking at James White, Bilal Powell, or DeAndre Washington, which one would you grab?
Bilal Powell. I'm worried about Forte's health right now. And I'm worried about the Jets. Period.
they have they've definitely trended downhill, but Matt Forte, his snaps have dipped down the last 2 weeks. After playing, I think it was 77% of the snaps in weeks 1 and 2, he's down to, I think it's like 58% over the last 2 weeks. So they're definitely starting to give Bilal Powell more work. There was no reason they shouldn't have been to begin with. And I think Bilal Powell is somebody that if Forte did, if that injury is legitimately something, Bilal Powell immediately enters the RB2 conversation. So Bilal Powell is probably the long-term high upside play there. DeAndre Washington, I try to avoid the Raiders if possible. I think they want a committee. I don't think they ever want just one guy to carry the load. I think it's always going to be Latavius Murray, Washington, and then even Jalen Richard is contributing. So I try and stay away from the Raiders running backs. And then the last running back we're going to talk about before hitting our quick break is Josh Ferguson. Daniel, I know you wanted to talk about him. Do you think that he's more worthwhile than the guys we just talked about, though? Because it seems like Josh Ferguson, to me, is just a pass-down specialist, that he's not built to carry the ball, kind of like a Darren Sproles.
Yeah, more or less. I'm not rushing out to get Ferguson to start him right away, but if I'm in a PPR league and I'm, the only guy in front of Ferguson, even if he's not ready for a 3-down roll, is Frank Gore, and you cannot count on a guy of that age to stay healthy, even if it is Frank Gore in his history. Ferguson's coming off a game with 10 targets and 7 receptions. Even if he only did 33 yards on that work, that is a lot of work for a running back. And if he can be targeted anything close to that rate going forward, he's going to at least be interesting in a Cole Beasley sort of sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what you'd play him as a flex, hoping for Cole Beasley type numbers. I know that he had it was 10 targets this week. He's only the second running back this year in fantasy football to see 10 targets in the passing game as a running back. Gio Bernard was the other one back in week 2. But guys, give us just 2 seconds as we get a word from our sponsors. All right, guys, welcome back. We are here. We have covered quarterbacks and running backs, and now we are on to wide receivers. The wide receiver position is really deep on waiver wires this week. And, Brandon, we're going to start with you right at the top. We are going to go Quincy Enunwa. I was surprised to see him as little owned as he is, because he's under 40% in Yahoo leagues. I know that number is going to go up, because once that Eric Decker injury was announced, I don't know why people didn't run to the waiver wire before this week's game to grab him, but if he's sitting there on your waiver wire, how let's say that you have a free agent acquisition budget, how much are you willing to spend on Quincy Enunwa?
Well, I listened to our show, so I got him in week 2. But if I were to have been lazy, no, just kidding. I just, yeah, I mean, I guess I would play, 10 to 20%. I'm not going too all in. This Jets, your quarterback is throwing 10 interceptions to 4 touchdowns. I'm having some serious concerns about what's going on with Fitzpatrick, if Geno Smith's going to get in there. I mean, I think a benching is like right on the precipice here, and that's going to throw everything off. They really depend on Decker for solid productivity, and that's what really opened up Enunwa, especially in weeks 1 and 2, right? That Eric Decker and Brandon Marshall both had to be defended, so there was just no way to also defend Enunwa, and he's a very talented, pass catcher. He has good hands. He's getting it done. And I don't have a problem with that. I enjoy him as a talent. I am concerned about the New York Jets offense as a whole. I do not like the matchup at Pittsburgh. Right now, they're giving up the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So I think this is going to be a rough week. So if you have to be patient, or if you can be patient, then great. And I have them in deep leagues, of course. But I do think there are red flags here, though. And unfortunately, none of them have to do with Enunwa's actual production as a player.
Right, yeah, then that's the thing. Ryan Fitzpatrick, they paid a lot of money to come back, and he held out this entire time. And they're getting close to the point where it's like, okay, do we throw the towel in the season? And in that case, Eric Decker might be shut down, and therefore you're looking at Enunwa as the number 2 wide receiver. And the plus side to him is that where a lot of Decker's production came from was the slot last year, even some of it this year. And Enunwa in week 4, he played 93% of his snaps out of the slot. So he's still staying in the slot even, like essentially all the time, which is very, very good for his production. So as long as Eric Decker's out, I think Enunwa is locked in as a wide receiver 3 in fantasy lineups. So for me, I'm willing to spend up if you need wide receiver help. Nathan, one player that, he kind of was on fantasy radars, then he was off, then he was on, then he was off. This past week, he was right behind Antonio Brown in terms of production for the Steelers. Eli Rogers, he's hurt, he's missing time. Marcus Wheaton has been bad. He got benched, and he only caught 1 pass, saw 1 target this week. Sammy Coates, he's the name that kind of ended up back on waiver wires. Is he somebody that you're excited to grab?
Yeah, he's someone that I'm cautiously optimistic about. He's someone where in the first week you see him make a big catch, and it's like, okay, that's cool. Probably won't do it again. But then each week he's been making at least 1 big catch, and then this past week he had a couple more good catches to go along with it to help his numbers. But he's someone where Le'Veon Bell's back in the offense. He's even seeing snaps at wide receiver. Marcus Wheaton's been back the past 2 weeks. He might see more time, so I'm concerned about his playing time. But if Coates keeps making big plays like this, Ben Roethlisberger is going to start throwing to him more. So he's someone where I think he has probably the highest upside of any of these wide receivers that we might talk about. But I could also see there being some weeks where he doesn't get that big catch and then only ends up with 2 or 3 catches for barely any yards in a game. So I'd be optimistic about him, but I might not want to be starting him in this next week or 2 until he's more consistent.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a worry for me when you talk about consistency in the Steelers' production. You wanted to see who was locked into that role. And honestly, week 4 did a lot for me in terms of Sammy Coates because he did outsnap Marcus Wheaton. We know Wheaton's healthy. He saw 8 targets compared to just the 1 for Wheaton. So for me, I think Sammy Coates is probably my number 2 target on the waiver wire this week. But Daniel, another one that's kind of come up, and I can't get behind this, but I might be wrong. Please tell me if I am. Eddie Royal. I can't get excited about grabbing Eddie Royal off the waiver wire, but I know there's a lot of people out there that think that this production is legit. He's outproduced Alshon Jeffrey. Why shouldn't I grab him? What do we do with him?
I mean, you said you couldn't get excited about Eddie Royal. Anybody who can get excited about Eddie Royal needs to seek help. It's Eddie Royal. That said, Kevin White is banged up. We don't know if he's going to play. Alshon Jeffrey is perpetually banged up. If I'm in a bind, I have no issue going to Royal this week. I mean, it's going to come down to him and Zach Miller if things go the wrong way for the Bears. And at that point, you've got to go in on somebody. But it's painful to even say that.
No, guys, his catch rate in the slot is 93.3. It's number 1. He is the number 1 slot receiver in the league right now.
It's insane. He's caught 18 of 22 targets. Like I said, he's outproduced Alshon Jeffrey. He's the only wide receiver in Chicago to catch a touchdown. He's caught 2 of them. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. the numbers say yes, but my heart says no. I can't.
I know.
I don't know if you can trust Eddie Royal, but the thing is, this week they play the Colts, so it's another good matchup. I know Darius Butler was out last week, so I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. He's got another good matchup in week 5, so if you're feeling froggy, leap, I guess. Another name.
Wow.
Another name that's kind of come up. Another name that's come up over the last 2 weeks, actually. It's not even just this 1 week, but it's Robert Woods. You know, with Sammy Watkins missing time, Robert Woods has now seen 18 targets over the last 2 weeks. And when any wide receiver sees 9 targets a game, you want to take notice in fantasy football. So, you know, Brandon, is Eddie Royal or Robert Woods more attractive to you?
Gosh, that's the worst question you've ever asked me.
Isn't it?
That's really, really tragic. So I'm going to say that, you know, Robert Woods, his yards per route run is 1.41. It's not impressive, but you know, you would think that they're going to have to do more short passes, because certainly just airing it out of nowhere was rough and got their offensive coordinator fired. So there's a part of me that thinks, you know, that's the way it's going to be. You know, now that Sammy Watkins is on IR, they have to throw the ball to him. He's going to be one of those guys that I'm doing at the flex or a wide receiver 3, someone that is doing bye-week fill-ins. But certainly if you're seeing 9 targets a game, the volume gives him such a high floor, as opposed to Sammy Coates, who over 47% of his passes are for over 20 yards. If he doesn't catch them, he gets nothing. So, I mean, I think that depending on your matchup, especially if you get blown out on Thursday night, you'll go with the Sammy Coates, whereas if someone stunk it up on Thursday night that you're going up against, then you want to start a Robert Woods. I always ask people, when people ask me start sit questions on Sundays, what did Thursday look like? Because that's how I determine those things between like Robert Woods, Sammy Coates, what have you. Eddie Royal, you know, Steady Eddie is in the Robert Woods camp for me. But, you know, hey, I think those players have value during the bye weeks. There are 4 teams on byes right now.
Yeah. That's the weird part. Is that's why, you know, the waiver wire is so deep, and that we have to talk about some of these players, because these bye week issues are real. Injuries are real. Flex spots are wide open because all the injuries that have kind of taken place. Usually running backs can occupy those, but it's hard to find running backs out there that are guaranteed 10 touches a game. It really is. But one player I probably should have even brought up to higher on this list that I want to talk to you about, Nathan, is Chris Hogan. Chris Hogan is, I mean, how do you not love this guy with Tom Brady coming back? They get the Browns this week. We know that. That matchup is fantastic. He has actually played the most snaps of any Patriots wide receiver. So tell me, should I trade for Chris Hogan? If he's on waiver, should I pick him up?
I wouldn't trade for him. I think if he's on waivers, pick him up for this week, because this week's matchup could be great for him. But even though he's seeing that much playing time, I don't see him being as high of an option for Tom Brady. He still has Edelman. He still has Gronkowski. I could see Bennett seeing more targets than Hogan. Even though he's seeing that playing time, we've seen other number 2 wide receivers see playing time in Brady's offense before and not see huge production. And even though the Patriots like Hogan, I don't think he's that great of a player. I don't think he was back in Buffalo. And so far, yeah, he hasn't had the greatest quarterbacks throwing to him, but he hasn't produced much to this point. So, yeah, he could do really good with Brady, but I don't see that definitely happening.
In the preseason, they looked like they had a connection between him and Hogan. So I'm curious to see it. I mean, if he's on the waiver wire, I'm absolutely picking him up, checking out that, you know, and even if he does well this week, and if you want to try and move him after that, saying, hey, him and Brady have this connection, you could do that. But I could kind of see him as the Brandon LaFell of this offense. And, you know, if Brandon LaFell didn't drop all those passes last year, he would have had a solid fantasy year, as he did the year before. But another name further down the list as we get further down here, you know, one name that, Daniel, I know that I was low on Golden Tate coming into the year. I wasn't a big fan of him. But this week he got benched. So there's a lot of people out there wondering what to do with him. But more importantly, what do we do about Anquan Boldin? Is he someone that, you know, kind of taken over Golden Tate's role in this offense?
To a point, sure, but his Golden Tate's role in the offense is being dispersed to Bolden and Eric Ebron and Theo Riddick, and I would rather almost every guy we've talked about so far than Bolden if I'm starting somebody, because I think Bolden is going to have a fine floor. He's going to get you a few points each week. He's never going to have much of a ceiling. And so, I mean, yeah, if you want a reliable 4 to 6 points, sure, why not? But man, if I'm going for somebody on the wire, I want a higher ceiling than that.
Yeah, his floor is there. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not, it doesn't seem like he's topping 60 yards in any week. So, yeah, that's more of like a desperation flex for a bye week. But, Brandon, a couple guys that are further down, and these are like kind of the higher upside guys, but they do have really low floors. Devontae Adams and Kenny Stills. These guys are available in a lot of leagues, and Raisin just keeps producing, and I cannot shake it from my mind. I've been waiting for Devontae Parker to kind of step up, and I do think that Parker will get his, especially this week too. But is Kenny still somebody that should be on fantasy teams and potentially starting, or would you rather have Devontae Adams?
Well, I had to change my settings because our signature stats are set at 50%. Or more snaps, and I had to change it to 25% to get Kenny Stills on there. So think about that for a minute. I don't love that. 33% of his passes are all 20 yards or more, and that's with Brian Tannehill throwing the ball. It makes me a little nervous. So sure, yeah, he can actually get, he's done it a couple times where he gets that big play, and that's awesome. But he's definitely risky for me going forward based on, again, Miami's offense is just dire. It's a dire situation on all levels. So I'm a little worried about that. But, sure. I mean, and Devontae Adams, yes, he is very matchup dependent for me. And he's definitely someone that needs to get in the end zone. Jordy Nelson, wow, congratulations to him. He has really bounced back in a way that surprised me, at least. He's a little bit on the older side to be coming back from an ACL, but man, he has completely changed the way that I view that. So he's definitely the wide receiver one. The problem is Randall Cobb. What?
He's got some positive regression coming his way. I actually just came out with an article this morning, the fantasy stock market, talking about Randall Cobb and how, honestly, I think he's one of the best buy low targets out there right now, because you can get him for like a wide receiver for cost, because people are talking about dropping him. And I think that's stupid. If Aaron Rodgers did get back on some semi sort of track last week against the Lions, Aaron Rodgers is the man. Like, he throws at least 30 touchdowns a year. We know that. It's like the Drew Brees. And Randall Cobb was never the guy that was going to get you a ton of yardage. Just wait on the touchdown, guys. If he had caught 2 touchdowns to this point in the year, the perception on him would be completely different.
But he hasn't. I mean, at some point we have to say, is he the touchdown guy?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
If he's not the yardage guy and he's not the touchdown guy, what guy is he?
Well, do you think that Jordy Nelson's going to catch 23 touchdowns?
No, but I had to pause. That's all I'm gonna say. I think he's the touchdown guy. I think this Randall Cobb thing. I mean, I think it's real. I think the panic is real. I'm not saying that I would drop him, but I'm not saying I'm starting him every week either. I think at this point you have to adjust.
I think. Go ahead, Daniel.
I think Cobb's going to be better than he has been, but less than he was. We've seen the best days of Randall Cobb, but he's also not going to finish the year with no touchdowns. Give him 4 the rest of the way. He'll be a flex, a fill-in sort of guy. But superstar Randall Cobb is just not reality anymore.
Well, Jordy Nelson, I think the ceiling on Jordy Nelson, I'd probably set it at like 12, 13 touchdowns. And, Devontae Adams is not going to catch 2 touchdowns every 3 weeks. That's not going to happen. The tight end position's been a mess for Green Bay. Like I said, I'm buying low on Randall Cobb, and you guys can come back and murder me for that if I am wrong. But I'm telling you that Randall Cobb is an excellent buy low. Real quick, so let's go with the Cowboys wide receivers. Bryce Butler, Terrence Williams with this whole Dez Bryant injury. There's so many different reports coming out about Dez Bryant. It was a fracture in his knee. No, it's not that. It's just like a little chip. No, it's not that. It's a bone bruise. Now, the fact that he traveled to San Francisco makes me feel better about him, and the fact that they left the door open for him to play at all. So I tend to think that he's going to be back sooner rather than later. But if you're in the camp that thinks Dez Bryant's going to miss some time, Bryce Butler or Terrence Williams as the addition?
I would go with Bryce Butler. He's basically taken the Dez Bryant role there. He saw 9 targets. They're both seeing about the same playing time, but I think Butler's been a bigger part of the offense with Bryant out, so I think Butler will continue to be a bigger part of the offense. He's going up against the Bengals this week, which I don't think is a great matchup for him. And then if Dez is back sooner rather than later, then there goes all of Butler's playing time.
Mm-hmm.
But if a report is out that Dez Bryant is going to miss significant time, and we know that for sure, then definitely go ahead and get Butler so you can play him in better matchups. But if it's a short-term thing, or if you're just looking for a wide receiver for this week, I don't think Butler is your guy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Terrence Williams, there's almost just no upside there. He's going to catch a touchdown every now and then, and it's just we've kind of learned what he is. He's just like that wide receiver 4 that's got a very, very boring ceiling. But one player I didn't even know if we needed to talk about, but we kind of do, because he does lead the Chargers in snaps, and that's Dontrell Inman. He had a big game in Week 4, but Daniel, is this somebody that we should spend time talking about? I mean, coming into this game, he hadn't even reached 50 yards. Like in all 3 games combined, he had not caught 50 yards receiving. And then he catches 120 and a touchdown, and everybody's saying that he should be owned. What's your take on him?
Inman's interesting. I mean, it's pretty clear at this point we don't know. We're not going to have a good grip on who's going to be the number 1 receiver in San Diego on a week-to-week basis. We've thought it's Travis Benjamin. We've thought it's Tyrell Williams. Hunter Henry is going to be around. Antonio Gates might come back. We really don't know, and that's going to make it hard to pick any one of these guys in each week. But I think you have to consider Inman part of that group, and if he's part of that group, then we have to talk about him at least as a emergency pickup.
Brandon, do you think he's worth an addition, or is it just like let somebody else grab him and worry about the fluctuation in games?
I think it's more of a timeshare than we thought. I think Travis Benjamin's fumble just kind of solidified that for us, which is frustrating.
That fumble was so bad.
It was so bad. It wasn't even close. I mean, it was just, there's no excuse, just none. So I think that this is more of a timeshare between the 3 of them than we initially thought. So do I think that he's a little bit of a Hail Mary? Yes, but I think there are worse Hail Marys. So, at least at the beginning of the season, Phillip Rivers likes to throw the ball around. He's usually pretty good, pretty productive on a fantasy level. So once we get to week 9 and 10, I might say something different. But I am let's put it this way. McCoy was ticked at the entire team. I am very interested to see how this offense looks moving forward after that week. I don't think that you can bench someone forever for one fumble. But listen, they brought Travis Benjamin in to be a complement. They didn't bring him in to be the wide receiver 1. So maybe they're going to try out the other 2 guys to be compliments as well, and all 3 of them be a little more even. And again, Dontrell Inman's been in for more snaps. He is around, so I can't argue with picking him up.
I just can't trust a guy that he had seen 8 targets in the first 3 weeks, despite the fact that they had all these injuries and that. But, we're going to move on to tight ends. And, that's kind of like an interesting little segue here. We'll stick with the Chargers. This is a team that has suffered a lot of injuries. One of those injuries was to Antonio Gates. And stepping up in his place, Hunter Henry. And, I've said it before. I know he's a rookie tight end, but I believe that he might be better for this offense than Antonio Gates in this point in their careers. Nathan, do you agree with me? Do you think Hunter Henry is someone that you should pick up? Or do you think this is still Gates' job and he's more of just like a handcuff to Gates?
I think it is still Gates' job. So whenever Gates does get back, I think Gates will still see a ton of playing time, and Henry will still be in for 2 wide receiver sets, sub in for Gates here and there. But Henry, he's had 2 good weeks these past 2 weeks, but they've come up against the Colts and the Saints. He's still only seeing 5 to 6 targets per game, which I'd like to see a tight end in that offense get a little more, or if he was playing better defenses, I think he definitely needs more to stay relevant. But I am cautiously optimistic that if Gates' injury continues to linger on, that Henry can still see playing time, can still see some targets, and continue doing well. So I'd cautiously be optimistic about adding him, but I do think once Gates is back, that hurts his upside a bit.
Yeah, I think it's one of those rare situations where it's a tight end handcuff, where it's like whoever plays from that team, like play them. Play Gates if he's playing, or, if Gates is out, play Henry. I mean, I like them both. Just because Gates, they're trying to get him those touchdowns. They're trying to hit the milestone, but I just don't know what's going to happen. I think we might be at the end of the road. Daniel, Charles Clay, that can't be a name we're excited about, right? Like, we know where Charles Clay's been, right?
I thought I was being so sneaky a couple weeks ago and picked up Clay when we knew Watkins was out as a DFS play, and I got a grand total of 0.
Yep.
Clay will have 2 or 3 games this year where he has 60 yards in a score, and we'll say, oh, it's Charles Clay, let's do stuff with him, and then he'll have 1 catch for 4 yards the next game. Clay is a guy who has no predictability, no reliability, and no fantasy relevance as far as I'm concerned.
I'm right there with you. But we're going to close out this show with a bang. Brandon, we're going to you. The number one tight end pickup of the week, if he wasn't already owned, but like looking at it, he's not owned in a lot of leagues, and that's Cameron Brate. Cameron Brate, is he a tight end one, Brandon?
I mean, this year, I could be a tight end one. Are you kidding me? Holy mackerel. Yeah, I mean, again, we have a small sample size. He's got 16 of his 24 targets for 159 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 1 drop, I guess, but no fumbles. He hasn't made a huge mistake. And frankly, everyone else on Tampa Bay is... I feel bad for them, though. Their start of season schedule was really tough. They've had some rough games. I get it. But it looks like, Jameis Winston wants him. And, there was some hype about him in the preseason. But then, everyone, Austin Seferian-Jenkins and all his potential. And, gosh, wow, that went to poop, literally. And it just is what it is. So, yeah, I think he's the number one pickup. Actually, I'm not going to say that because Zach Miller is still available in a lot of leagues, and I think you people are crazy. I think that's the number one pickup to me. Same with Jimmy Graham, who's available in weird amount of leagues. Then I'm going Cameron Brate for me personally.
Yeah, Cameron Brate's going to be a little bit, for me, I think it might be a little bit of a Jacob Tammy thing where you're going to get some games here and there. But, when you're talking about, 6 to 8 targets a game like Brate's been getting, I think it's hard to ignore it, especially with the state of the tight end right now in today's, and, this year's NFL, I should say. The tight end's a weird spot. But, guys, thank you, as always, for tuning in for another episode of the Fantasy Slant. We hope you guys got some information from this, able to go to your waiver wires and hit them up. So, for Nathan Jahnke, Daniel Kelley, Brendan Marianne Lee, I am Mike Tagliere, and we will see you guys next time. Until then, lights out.